at the end of the day, it's still people that make decisions, and it's still people that ultimately are the ones who decide the next level of a business. Even if the business itself almost has its own identity and there may be the next level identity for a business, it's still up to the people in the individuals that are in those key positions that shape what that looks like.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Inventor and author of Primal Habits, Uninflamed, Master of You, and Body Thrive, and soon to be released, The Witch's Cancer Journal.
A weaver of words and ancient worlds into the future.
Plumbing for depth in the playground of your continual reinvention.
A wisdom bridge, Agayana Yoini.
And now the moment we've been waiting for is here.
Ringleader of Club Thrive and Wellness Pro Academy.
A freedom warrior, earth mother, proud mama, devoted wife.
Not your grandmother's Ayurveda.
Futurist. Biohacker. Guru and Goofball.
Where truth and freedom prevail.
Evolving the ancient into the future.
Welcome to the Thrive with Cate Stillman podcast. Made for you by us.
All right, everyone. This is Cate Stillman with the Thrive with Cate podcast, and I'm here with a good old friend, Krista Grasso, whose website is leanoutmethod.com. Krista is the go-to strategic planning and systems expert for online businesses when they want to scale. She's a business optimizer. She cuts through the noise and provides clarity on the core things that make the biggest impact to scale a business. But we're not going to talk about business today. We're going to talk about how do you project manage your personal, professional, and family goals. And part of the reason I want to do this is because even what I have found in working with a lot of, like in our Club Hero, where we work with this stuff really works. So what I would love for you to describe first is a little bit about lean, because you are the lean machine. You are leanoutmethod.com, and just describe a little bit about lean philosophy before we figure out how to use that and apply it to project managing our goals.
Yeah, absolutely. So lean, to break it down into its simplest sense, is really about increasing value and eliminating waste. So what are the things that are most valuable to you, and how can you go all in on those? And how can you get rid of absolutely everything else that does not support that, which would be waste? And I feel like that's true in business, in career, in family, in our bodies, like in general, right? What's a value that we can double down on, go all in on, and what is not that we can let go of to create more space for what actually matters?
Bam. And this is cutthroat. So it's like if we even, I know I was talking with you last week about Ben Hardy's books, 10X is easier than 2X. And he really gets in of like getting the 80-20 Pareto's principle and getting like when you're going into a massive evolution, which the right goal will do that. You have to like the 80% of who you've been gets like junked. It like gets recycled or upcycled or composted or however you want to say that. So when you're talking lean, it's the same exact, like I'm hearing the same exact philosophy here, which is so hard. Yeah. Like hard to identify, eh?
Oh my gosh. And it makes such logical sense. Who wants to spend their time on all of the wasted things that don't matter? Nobody. But if it were easy to identify and if it were easy to let go of those things, everybody would work and act and look a whole lot different.
It's like the whole wardrobe thing, right? Too. It's like we see it everywhere. We see it in our like medicine cabinet. We see it in our drawers. We see it in our digital files. We see that sort of the creep of that. I mean, I like how Jim Rohn said it, like life is accumulative. And there's a huge benefit of accumulating exactly the right things. But the problem with life is accumulative is like everything leaves a trail, right? Unless the stuff hits the paper shredder or whatever that is for your refrigerator, for your closet, for your medicine cabinet, for even the conversations at the dinner table, unless there's like the equivalent of the paper shredder, the accumulation is what bogs down lean. And then then it's much harder to hit our goals. Is that essentially how it goes?
Oh, yeah, we're fantastic at addition. We are terrible at subtraction. And the problem with addition is you keep adding more, 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 but you reach capacity. You reach capacity in all of the different ways. You don't have more time. You don't have more energy. Depending on what you're doing, you might not have more financial resources, right? Whatever it is, when you keep saying yes, when you keep adding more and you don't take the time to lean out all the things that aren't important, to get rid of the waste and the accumulations over time, you just max yourself out in such a way that you either can't achieve the goals that you have, or you're going about it in such a slow, painful path. It just isn't very efficient. It's not very effective, and you may never actually get there.
Right. And then you lose confidence in yourself and you think that you're not the kind of person who can do the thing like that. And it's like really just more or less a process issue is what I'm hearing, like that there's actually a process to identifying the 80% that needs to get paper shredded. And in that process, you're honing in and clarifying even more what the 20% is that leads to 80% of the future results. That's Pareto's principle. And that in the process of that clarification, you identify exactly what it is that actually needs to be done, because there's now time and space without all the what was essential in the last phase, which is now clutter in the next phase. We actually have like a decent plan to go into a project management tool.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about how to identify the 80% of the paper shredder.
Yeah, it all starts with vision. You have to know where you're going to know what's actually important right now, and to know what you need to create space for next. Because saying no to anything, even if it's something that you want to get rid of, sometimes it can be really hard to let that go. You have fear of disappointing your family or your friends or yourself, right? There's all of these emotions caught up sometimes in saying no, on top of the practical, how do I say no to this and actually get it out of my schedule or out of my commitments? And so in order to really make that commitment and push through and do the things that you need to say no, to create space for what's next and for what you want next, whatever those big goals are, I think that you have to first get really clear on what you want, and you need that internal drive and that internal motivation. And without the vision, without that clarity on what you want and why it's so important, you're not going to have that. So to me, that's key. You have to get really, really clear on the vision for what's next. And when I'm working with businesses, I look at this in three facets. There's what you see for the business itself, what you see for yourself and your role in the business, and what you see for your clients of tomorrow. And if you extrapolate that out to just your life, your career, those same facets apply. They're just a little different, right? It might be, what do you see for your family instead of clients? What do you see for your career instead of your business? And then what do you see for your role in that? What does it look like to you? I call it a rich, fulfilled life, right? What does a rich, fulfilled life look like to you across all those different facets? And who's the person you need to step into and become in order to enable that going forward? I know this fits so much with a lot of what you talk about, but to me, it really does come down to having clarity of vision and getting clear on what kind of identity evolution you need to make in order to step into that and make that possible. And that is what is the backdrop of being able to effectively achieve your goals and lean out anything that's getting in the way of being able to do so.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting too with, I just want to make a plug for intuition here, like having a commitment to your intuition in the process of asking about your goals, and then asking yourself about what doesn't exist in light of those goals, like what can no longer exist in light of those goals. When I was doing this recently, I became really aware that like what doesn't exist in the light of my future goals is really any negative self-talk. And like this brings me right back to meditation 101, 1998, something like that, when I started to really develop a meditation practice, and how that ability to filter thought, right? And to let go and to not plug into the pattern. And yet it took me 2 decades, which is maybe a testament to my own ineptitude, or just being human, or both, is that like the cutthroat nature of what thoughts don't exist at that future, at that future vision of myself, like that those two things cannot take up the same space. Like they cannot compete in my head because it's so inefficient. And it's totally tied to my birth PTSD pattern, right? Which like to me is like sort of everybody's too. Like I'm not a special one in this case. Like I'm just a cultural phenomenon in terms that like anyone that had birth trauma, anyone that wasn't nursed to term, like anyone that blah, 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 right? Chances are there's a pattern under the pattern that's driving the subconscious mind that cannot really exist at the same level of your 10x future self, or like of the goal that you really, really want. And so that, it's like how we undermine ourselves, right? In light of the goal, like that's where that 80% really shows up, that like it just can't coexist. So I'm curious how you've seen this, navigated this, especially in the examples of work, because you work a lot with companies. That is really different than me working with like people's healing issues and healing crises and identity evolutions, which are so explicit in our work, where yours is like, I'm sure it's all implicitly happening behind the scenes as they lean out. And I'd love to hear what kind of like pops in as I talk about that.
It does. And at the same time, right, even businesses, no matter how big they are, I've worked with Fortune 10 businesses, I've worked with small emerging entrepreneurs, right? And so the scope of it, at the end of the day, it's still people that make decisions. And it's still people that ultimately are the ones who decide the next level of a business. Even if the business itself almost has its own identity and there may be the next level identity for a business, it's still up to the people in the individuals that are in those key positions that shape what that looks like. And more often than not, it's funny. It's like, I feel like sometimes we look at people in these other positions and think they must have it all together. And wouldn't it be great if we were like that? And they have the exact same doubts, the exact same issues. They have to do their own identity evolutions. They have their own imposter syndrome and things that they're battling themselves. And so even though it is a business journey that I'm on with a lot of people, it's still very much a personal one, because that's how the business evolves. And if it's not a personal journey at the same time, I feel like that's how the business gets stuck.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Right. And then it's often not, it's like the shadow issues of the business, or the issues that are behind that are not as obvious or explicit, that are really driving the result. Right.
Exactly. Because if you think about the mechanics of achieving a goal, if we take this down to more of a kind of tactic level at this point, it's like you've got this thing you want to achieve. You reverse engineer your results to go off and do it. There may be multiple paths, but you're going to make some decisions about different things you want to try and different things you're going to do with the intention of hitting that goal. It's very action oriented. We can map that out. We can really clearly map that out. We can stick it in a project management tool. I'm sure we're probably going to talk about how to do that. But at the end of the day, what frequently gets in the way is much less that and much more the internal doubt, dialogue, things like that. It's the personal growth that the person needs to go through in the commitment to push through when there's issues and challenges and things of that nature that ultimately dictate whether or not you achieve the goal. It's like we can take the mechanics and break down exactly how to do it, but it's more the personal journey that influences the result.
It makes me understand so much more of Dan Sullivan, a strategic coach, and Ben Hardy's process with like the gap and the gain thinking, and the recognizing where you've already done it before and measuring yourself against who you were rather than the ideal, because you're actually like building the confidence and the examples from your past. And that's part of like that rewriting of your own history to be like, oh my gosh, I'm the kind of person who can change and can adapt and can let go of these things and can step into this bigger role and needs to develop new relationships, new skills in order to do the thing that I most want to do. And it's like that building of the self-confidence, that rewriting of the internal dialogue that actually digests some of that doubt.
Yeah. And I mean, it's when we're in a great place, right? If everything's going swimmingly well for you right now, it's easy to make really amazing decisions. And when things are going terribly and you're under a ton of pressure and a ton of stress and nothing feels like it's working, it's really hard to make really good decisions or to see how and look back and be like, every time I've been in a situation like this before, I've gotten through it. I've come out stronger. It was somehow supporting my next level, even though I couldn't see it at the time. We're not thinking that when we're dealing with it in the moment. Unless we do what you just talked about and we're intentionally pre-building that muscle. So when we reach those situations, we think about it differently.
Yeah. So it's like that Rise and Thrive guide I was talking about yesterday of like how, and you guys who want it, it's at go.clubthrive.global/rise, RISE, and you go into your 5-year vision and your personal goals, but you see it every single day so that you know your long-term goals, your short-term goals, who you need to evolve into in order to do the thing, your personal mantra and your personal protocols and your character traits that you need to develop in order to do the thing, the next vision, be the next identity. And it's that continual reminder that's part of like the baseline habit, because when we don't remind ourselves, it's just so easy to get pulled into yesterday.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how to think lean about personal, professional, and family goals. Just where do you go with that question? How to think about it?
So the first thing I'll say is a lot of times I feel like we put a lot of pressure on ourselves that we should do a whole lot of things. And you might end up getting yourself pretty overwhelmed, feeling like there should be all of these goals. I need to do this and this and this and this facet of my life and this in my career and this over here. And it's like we almost set ourselves up to not be successful from the start because we're doing a lot of I should and we're piling too much on. I think when you want to be really successful, you want to look at a macro level at your goals. What are the things that are going to be the most transformational? The things, if we even just look out 1 year, if we look at the end of 2024, so it's January 2025, you're looking back on 2024, and it was one of the most amazing years that you've had personally, professionally. What would have happened? Like if there were just 1 to 3 big things that happened, there might be a lot of little things underneath it. But if you break it down to that, what would that have looked like? Is there something related to your health, related to your family, related to your career, whatever those things are for you? I think that's where you want to start. And that's how you set yourself up for success. If you've got a list of 30 different things, it's going to be really hard to make meaningful movement on any of them. You want fewer, less is definitely more. Lean is definitely better in this case, because the fewer you have, the more you can go all in on those, and the more you can experiment and try different things to really move yourself forward.
So if people have the 30, like how do you help them whittle it down to like the 1 or 2?
Yeah, it's usually if you've got the 30, you're at a level of lower, right? And so if you have the high level here, those are going to naturally break down to different things you need to do. If you've got 30, they're probably more actions or more activities than they are actual goals. And so usually what I do with people is we just start to group them together. We start to thematically put them together. And it's like, okay, all of these seem to be really related to your health, or they seem to be related to specifically you being more fit and more mobile, right? And so like whatever that goal is for you. And so we'll map out, well, what is that? Overall, what is it that you're trying to achieve here? And why is that so important to you? What today can't you do that you're hoping you'll be able to do when you're able to achieve this goal? Or what's this going to unlock and enable you to be able to do? And so it's more just looking at how those things come together. And there's always really clear themes. So if you've got a list of 30 and you just start thematically looking at it and you start asking yourself the why behind the what, not just what you think you need to do throughout the year, but specifically, what is it that you really want and why is that driving you? Why is that important? It's usually pretty easy to get it down to a list of 1 to 3.
Yeah. And then it sounds like too, part of the 30 is like strategic or tactical to get to the 1 to 3. And it's more of like a bigger understanding and an easier communication in the mind of this is really all those things drive to this bigger overarching. Okay.
Absolutely.
Now I often talk with people, and maybe this is because I'm in sort of the new age woo-woo space, that are like, well, I just don't really have goals. I literally just had this conversation 25 minutes ago. I don't have any goals. Like, I just want, like, my goal is to be present now, and that's it. And just kind of see and I guess part of my question here is like, is that a cop-out? Because like what Dan Sullivan, who grows entrepreneurs, he's like, your future should always be bigger and brighter than your past, right? Because that's like, that points towards meaning, like, and it's going to leverage all the things that you've been, and meaning drives towards all the other things that humans like depth, purpose, happiness, growth, impact, legacy, like all those things. So even if it's just to feel more present, it's like the goal, according to him then, would be like, well, there's certain things that you become in order to see how you are more present. Like, because we're always in, if we look at being and becoming, to me, it's like the being cop out. But if we're in being, like the crazy fucking thing about beingness, according to like every spiritual tradition, I think ever, is that it goes somewhere, right? It goes to evolution. Like we're not evolving. Right? Well, I mean, a lot of us are not evolving, but those of us who are evolving, because we're simply tuned into like, this is how nature works, is like nature drives towards evolution. I mean, you can even see it in your relationship with your pets. It's like the relationship goes somewhere. It doesn't, with love and attention, things happen, different things happen. Those of you who are gardeners, like I know in my little, and I'm not really a gardener, I'm like a hack. I'm a hack at a million things. And one of the things I hack at is gardening. And it's like, you just somewhat give love and attention. Like I'm not talking about like all in number one goal, but like somewhat give love and attention, something starts to happen and you get way more species diversification. You start to see who shows up. You start to see who just naturally grows and prospers. You learn along the way, you get better. So again, like 25 minutes ago when I was talking to the person that has no goals and is just into being, I was harvesting kale seeds, right? Because like the plants naturally that are thriving create an abundance of seeds that you can then do something with. And this is sort of, to me, like the nature of nature. So what do you say to the person who's like, I'm just going to be uber present, super pieced out, blissed out, and I have no goals?
So here's my initial thought on that is my guess is they probably have some trauma around goals in the past. And one of my friends calls them punishing goals versus pleasure goals. And she encourages people to go towards pleasure goals. I really like the way she frames that, because if you think, especially if you've ever had a job in corporate or anything like that, goals are this thing that you set that frequently was never going to happen. And then you get beat up all year long because it didn't happen, even though you knew from the beginning it was never going to happen. And then you get a performance review and you don't get what you really wanted because that unrealistic thing didn't actually happen, right? And so if you've had that kind of conditioning in the past, you may be a little goal averse and be like, I just want to be present. Like, I'm not going to do that whole goal thing. Forget it, right? That might be one scenario that I could see being very true. The other thing is goals for some feel like a lot of work and a lot of ambition. Like, I'm high achieving, I'm going to get this goal, I'm going to go. It's like it feels very masculine. It feels very heavy for some people.
Yeah.
And if that's how you're approaching it and thinking it in either of those two scenarios, I don't think the issue is, or the reality is, that you don't have goals. I think it's that you don't identify with the word. And so maybe it's just a reframing of what is it that you really want next year? What is it? Pick a different word. I don't care what word you use. There's something that you want. There's some kind of outcome, some sort of result, some sort of transformation that you're hoping to be able to see. If we look at the next year as an example, what is that for you? So I think it's more past experience with the word goal, or the attempt at achieving a goal and not being successful, that causes that reaction.
You totally nailed it. He was like PTSD corporate. Yeah. Yeah. He had a good exit and all that. And then he was like, I'm done. And it's like, oh, wait. Yeah. Yeah. So what do you really want to experience? Right. Who do you really want to become next? That even might trigger some of those people. So maybe it's really just like, what do you want? Like, what do you want next?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you want to do next? Yeah. I love that. That's super
Or even, how do you want to end next year different than this year? Like, how do you want the year to look different? How do you want your life to look different? I don't know. There's any number of things that I think you could do. It really depends on finding whatever it is that is going to drive you towards those positive changes and those positive evolutions to whatever is next for you.
Yeah. Because I think there's also a lack of knowing what other people are really experiencing. I mean, because we have like this sort of like cover girl social media type of disconnect, right? And we know that goes towards the negative if we look at the analytics of like, people don't feel better after like looking at all of the sort of like cover girl pictures of social media, right? Of like, here's my best moment, right? But what we find in our clubs is that people want deep connection. And we find that, on the entranceway into the club, and then they get that in the club, right? They get a much deeper level of connecting. And when that happens, goals become so much more exciting and unique and personal and experiential. And things really change where people like have a different relationship. So instead of a goal feeling too hard, it's like things become way more accessible, right? Just from having that depth of connection. It's often a who, as they say in like Dan Sullivan's world. It's like more of a who than a what. And if you're with the right who's, then something else starts to really happen. So even if the goal is like, I want deeply intimate relationships and in connection, I want to be around growth-oriented people. I want to be with people who actually like lift me up and talk about, you know, things that are exciting to me and inspiring to me, rather than feeling like I'm just with my goal all by myself, you know, and that I can't really get there, or that my family's not into it, or my friends aren't into it, or, you know, people at work aren't into the same growth path, because we hear that a lot as people come into the clubs. And then what ends up happening is they end up like inspiring the people around them without trying to be the inspirational person. It just is like a, you know, we just all wear off on each other kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I know I shared with you over these past couple of years, I've made so many improvements to my health. And for a lot of years, that was always one of those should goals. I wasn't in a place where I really was ready to make the changes or wanted to, but I felt guilty because it's like, well, I really should focus on my health, and I really should lose some weight, and I really should stop doing this, and I really should start doing this. And I would go into every year like people do. There's a New Year's resolution, right? You're supposed to be healthier and fitter and richer and like all of the things, right? And so I would set these goals, and I never felt excited about it. I never felt motivated by it. It was much more of a punishing goal where I would beat myself up and be like, I didn't really start exercising as much as I wanted, right? And then all of a sudden something shifted. It shifted in me, and it was more, I wanted to feel better. I wanted to make positive changes, and I wanted to do them for me. And it wasn't a goal because I should. It was a goal because that was what I wanted for my next level. And the ability to make those changes was so much easier because I felt motivated to do it as opposed to guilted into doing it. And nobody but me was guilting myself into it, right? It was all me. But it is just, it's totally amazing when you make that shift. And I think part of that is surrounding myself with people in your community. So you're just around it, and it's not a conscious decision. It's just at some point you realize you think differently. You make different choices. You have different behaviors, different habits. And I think sometimes those are the most powerful goals of all.
Yeah, it so much came up when you were saying that. Like, if I didn't have Club Thrive, right? So I'm a leader, but I'm also a member. Like, I would be way less aware of my intermittent fasting time. I'd be way less aware of cryotherapy. I'd be way less aware of microbiome diet, fast mimicking diet, liver stone cleanse, like just our baseline habits of, you know, the shit we do in Club Thrive, because like everyone's doing it. And I don't even need to read the forum. Like, it's just running it's the iOS, right? It's the operating system that all of us as members have chosen to be running on, right? And so it's just built into my consciousness of, it's like, these are the subconscious conversations that are happening that are driving towards that. The other thing that came up when you're describing that is I was just on with Kristen, who's in Club Thrive and Club Hero. And, you know, she was describing a healing crisis. And because healing crisis is part of our baseline language, we know how to relate, even though it's like when you're in a healing crisis, you never really think you're in a healing crisis. You just think it's like a horrible group of symptoms. Like, why me? And that's what we all have in common when we're in a healing crisis. But like, even that is in the shared collective. So I love in what you're saying, both in terms of like corporate goals, but also in personal goals, of it's like who we're in it with determines our thinking about it. And if who we're in it with is doing the 80-20 and can help us lean out all the stuff we know doesn't work, but it's harder to phase it out when we're standing alone in it, right? Then it's like so much harder. Another example that comes to mind is like Indy, my 15-year-old, will often go on these like, I want to clean it up kicks, right? And so if we just reinforce that's a decision that she made, she's voicing it, she's identified for herself how she wants to shape her behaviors next. we just reinforce that, it's really easy for her to step into it. If we sabotage it, then it's really hard for her to do that. So just recognizing that in terms of members of our family and their goals. Okay, so goals maybe isn't a good word. Maybe what we're using is what you want to do next, and we're identifying those, and then we're going to put another noun on that want. Now that we know what those are for ourselves and for each other, if we've been able to identify them with specificity, let's talk a little bit about project management. Because often what I find is the goals are not articulated to the person doesn't take time to like chisel and refine that highest level and the things that come underneath it, those 30 sub goals or whatnot. And then they often don't, because they haven't actually identified it, there's no real way to project manage it. So will you describe how lean can help someone, whether they're personal, professional, or family goals, or all three, go from the articulation into the project management?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the key things I want to say is I do think, what's the quote? How you do one thing is how you do everything, or something along those lines. I don't think we should keep our goals separate. And because really, truly, I don't think we are separate. We might try to put some boundaries between work and home and things of that nature, but we're still who's showing up in all of the places. And so at the end of the day, I think when you try to separate things out so much, it makes it hard sometimes to actually look at yourself as one you and make the decisions that you need to prioritize what needs to be prioritized, because things aren't usually in a nice, clean little box where you have exactly this much time for this and exactly this much time for this. As hard as we can sometimes try to make that happen, it's just not practical all the time. So I think the way you approach one thing, it can be really helpful and really freeing, actually, to approach everything in the same way. So if you might project manage your professional goals right now and haven't thought of applying it to personal, do the same thing if it works really well. If you've never project managed a goal, then as you put these practices in place that we're about to talk about, look at it holistically across all of your kinds of goals, because I do think that that's actually supporting you and simplifying and leaning out how you approach things, as well as just making it so much more likely that you're going to be successful. So I wanted to kind of give that framing first, but now let's get into some of the practicals of, okay, cool, but what do I do? So you've got this idea, you've got this goal, or whatever word we're choosing to substitute for goal, and you know what you want. I think it's really, really important to get clear on why it's important and what the impact of achieving it is going to have. And so I don't think it's enough to just say, I want to be fit. I want to pay off my debt. I want to, whatever it is, right? Instead of that, why is that so important to you? And what is that going to enable you to do? And the reason I think that's important is those are going to be your guiding principles for making decisions all throughout the year to be able to support you moving towards your goals, because it's not a straight line. Every action you take, every single thing you do is not going to work. It's not going to be super successful, and it's not always going to take you right where you want to go. So I think you want those guiding principles to look at, is this taking me directionally closer to where I want to be? Mm-hmm. And with that framing, then what you want to just figure out is, what are some things specifically that I can do and try to see if it takes me towards my goal? Don't look at it as I'm going to do this thing and I will achieve the goal. Look at it more from an experimentation mindset, because we don't always know exactly what's going to work, but we can come up with things that we can do that we think are going to work and that we think are going to take us there. And so I think that's some of the framing around it. And I love to do just a brainstorming exercise. I love a tool called Miro, Miro. If you have not used it, it is a brilliant online whiteboarding tool. You can do this in your notebook if you want to, on a whiteboard if you have one. But I literally just start to break things down. So it's like, okay, I want to achieve this. Well, how do I think I would need to get there? What would I need to do? And I just start writing things down. If you're putting them on sticky notes, just do sticky note after sticky note, and you can start to move things around. And you can say, okay, I could try this. I could try this. And then I always ask, what do I need to do before this? Is there anything I need to do beforehand to be able to do this?
Yeah.
Once I do this, is there anything I would need to be able to do after in order for it to stick or in order for it to be successful? And then you just start to stitch things together and you end up with a really beautiful roadmap that takes you there. It might sound a little complex as I'm talking through that, but it's actually pretty simple once you get going. It's more just what are some things that I could do? What do I need to do first in order to be able to do this? And what do I need to be able to do next? And then you just start to sequence them.
Mm. So between Miro, which is like the visual flow chart, and that was really cool to see how you break it down and how you ask yourself. I think especially the question of like what needs to come before in order for me to do this, because that's often not conscious and where people stumble, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whether it's a personal habit or whether it's a career goal. Getting that in the flow chart, I can see that being super useful, and especially because it's visual, right? So someone can actually see the treasure trail that leads to where they want to go. And what you also mentioned in there is that principle of like think big, test small, fail fast, learn always, right? That we have that methodology of running the next experiment, right? And regardless of the result, it's worthwhile that we ran the next best experiment that we could run, because we're changed from the experiment, and that's the learn always part. So huge, huge, huge. So when do people transition from that to actually, because I know so many people listening to this podcast are operating either off their mind, right, or never ending to-do list, which might even be like, Luddite analog on a piece of paper, and it just grows and grows and grows. And maybe they're even transferring it from like this page of their bullet journal to that page of their bullet journal. Where's the advantage that you see in using tools like Miro or using a project management tool like Monday for personal, professional, or family goals?
Yeah,
Or
absolutely.
any other tools?
Yeah, I love, love, love having one place to do things. And if you are a write it downer, get yourself a great planner, get yourself a great notebook, whatever works for you. If you are a digital person, like I actually do both. The act of physically writing things out to me helps me commit to it. And I find it actually just part of my daily ritual and getting clear on what I'm going to be focused on and what I'm going to be doing. But I also use a digital tool. For me, it's monday.com. Obsessed with Monday. I think it's just the easiest, simplest, most robust tool out there. We could talk about that for 4 days later. But love that. But whatever it is for you, I think you do want that one place where you are actually managing all of your work and all of your priorities and commitments. And this to me starts in that pure vision space. It moves into more of the brainstorming and the sequencing space of Miro, which we talked about. And then it moves into the very tactical space of your project management system, whether it's handwritten or whether it's digital. And that's where you're putting down what specifically am I going to do this week in support of the goal that I have. And if you do the step in the middle, if you don't just take the vision and then put some stuff down in your to-do list, and you take the step in the middle to actually brainstorm and sequence things out, you'll be able to do the right things at the right time that are taking you towards the vision, towards the goal, instead of it just simply being a whole bunch of work with no real feeling of progress towards it.
Yeah, and you can forget what you've done. I just want to make a plug for digital for the people in Club Thrive and Club Hero. And the reason is because so much information is a link right now, and we can waste so much time trying to figure out where we left off and what's next, that I just really can't imagine any project, like even if it's intermittent fasting, like really being done well without links. Like I kind of can get it for certain things, maybe intermittent fasting, but even then, like tracking is helpful. There's a link to the tracker. Like there's just so much that can help. And what I find is it's the figuring out how much time something actually takes to do. And often the thing that we thought was one step is like 10. And then as we figure out that it's 10, we want a place to capture what those next 10 things actually are, so that when we have our next little chunk of time to move something forward, move the ball down the field, or however you want to say it, that it's more efficient to start where we left off than to have to like go back and find the thing. Like I get quite upset if a team member assigns me a task and there's not a link and I have to go and look for that. I'm like, why are you wasting my time? I'm the CEO. Like, how much are you wasting everyone else's time? If you're willing to waste my time, how much are you willing to waste your own time? And I just find things are so digitally dependent, and I don't see that changing. I just see that like amplifying into the future. Yeah. So I guess what's your thought on that? Like, have you ever seen analog really work, or like everything in the bullet journal kind of thing really work or not?
I think it's hard for me to answer that because I am such a digital person that to me, I love the ritual of the planner. It's part of my morning routine. I have my coffee, I sit, I go through. I'm just more almost, but my planner is more of a journal than a planner also. So it's like, what am I focused on today? What am I grateful for today? So it's just the ritual of getting clear and centered in what's really important in that day. But I just spend my 5-10 minutes on it. It goes back on the wall behind me, which you could see the corner of it over there. And then I am right in, and I am using Monday for everything. All of my, what I accomplished, what I did, communications with my team, all of those things happen in Monday. And to your point, I love having it all digitally because I could look back at any point in time. If I'm like, oh, what was that thing that I did last November? I want to do this again. It's all right there. It's easy to access. It's easy to repeat. If you want to talk about being lean, there's not a whole lot of waste because you've literally got it right at your fingertips.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you want to just mention like how maybe tips on transitioning for people who, again, like their own list is driving them crazy. It overwhelms them because they just add to it. They don't have that sense of accomplishment even when they're checking the thing off. And often it's hard to find the information that goes with the to-do. To switching to online and how to think about using their calendar with their project management tool with their Miro board?
Yeah, absolutely. So first thing is, I think you want to get clear on your work style. I know for me personally, I work best in big blocks of time. I love a good focus block, and I love not pre-committing to what I'm going to do in that focus block, but having clarity on what's important so I could kind of pull things into the block. So to me, my calendar is more about blocking my time for work activities or for self-care activities or for whatever that is, plus noting when I have specific commitments, like being here, for example. So my calendar is a blend of places I need to be, people I need to be talking to, and blocks of time that I have for personal things or for work things. So I know some people use their calendar to literally manage tasks. I find that overwhelming and not super helpful. So I'll kind of share how I do it. So if you use your calendar, I like it as like, this block of time is dedicated to my professional. This block of time is dedicated to self-care or work. And here's where I need to be at 1 p.m. on Tuesday, right? And so that is how I use my calendar to support things. My work project management tool, to me, that's my backlog of priorities. And I think it's important to separate out your priorities from all the things you could do. I don't believe in having one list. Because if you have one list, you will leave every day feeling defeated. It is not possible for you to get through every single thing that's on your list. It's not. So I think you have a backlog of all of the things you could do, all of the things you'd like to do. And then you have your focused list of what you are going to do today.
Yeah.
And keep it short and keep it focused. And if by some magical unicorn, you end up with extra time, you can always go and pull something from your backlog and work on it. But don't overload yourself. Set yourself up to succeed instead of set yourself up for disappointment when you know that it's not possible to actually get done everything on your list. So that, I think, is one of the biggest game changers. Use whatever digital tool you have, get everything out there, but do not just work off of one list. Have a backlog and then have a focus list of what you're committed to for today or for this week. So that I find to be really, really effective. And the other thing too is look at how and what you track. So what I mean by that is your vision is this high level goal, aspiration. You probably have goals that support that for the year. But what about for this 90 days? What about right now? We're in Q4. Did you have any specific goals for Q4? That's one level of detail. Well, what are the really big things that you need to do to make that possible? Those I would call more like your projects. So there's the overarching goal, then there's more big project related things that you want to do. Then there's all the little details, all the little activities and all the little tasks. Sometimes it's really helpful to go to that level of detail. Other times you could stop at more of the project level because you don't even know what you're going to do, right? If I had tried to detail out every single thing I was going to do for my health, I would have overwhelmed myself.
Yeah.
But going in and experimenting with intermittent fasting, that was great. I think the first time you told me I should try to get to 16 or 18 hours, I was like, I could barely do 14. What? Right. And now I do 18 to 20 pretty regularly. But if I had gone in and set a task about that or a lot of detail about it, I would have kind of shut down before I did it. Instead, it was just like, well, let me just do 14 for a little bit if I'm comfortable with that. And let me see if I could push it a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And then one day I was like, I'm not that hungry right now. Let me see if I could do a 16 today. Oh, okay. Wait, I could. Maybe I'll see if I could do it again tomorrow. And so sometimes I think you do want to keep it higher level so you can give yourself some of that flexibility.
Yeah, I love it. This is so helpful. I know for a lot of you listening, you're like, oh my gosh, this is complicated. And others of you are like, oh my gosh, I got so much insight and something in between. But I think it's important to realize that when people, if we put them in a category of like people we look up to for their impact, right? Or people who we look up to because they inspire us in some ways, whether that's in terms of, whatever, it could be their fitness, it could be their impact or contribution, it could be on their whatever thought leadership, it could be anything, right? That we recognize that there's ways that certain people have achieved, right? And that if we can kind of get in, and I find this so much of what we do in Club Thrive and Club Heroes, it's like if we just break it down to this is how we go about that becoming who we want to become next, that it's not random, that there's a strategic way to think about it, there's strategic experiments to run, there's tracking, there's calendaring, there's block time on schedules, and in that we get better at knowing what we can do in a certain period of time and get better at knowing like who we need to be connected with and how we want to work, what our own style is, and how to set more experiential goals than just achievement goals so it doesn't feel like an uphill battle. This has been super helpful, Krista. I am really glad that you came on to talk about how to achieve personal, professional, and career goals and how to start to project manage and how to lean those out. Anything you want to mention in closing?
Yeah, I have a technique that I use that I find to be so incredibly helpful. I'll walk you through it really quickly. It's super simple. It's called Chuck. And Chuck stands for cut, hold, change, keep. And if you ever have too much on your plate, if you're ever feeling overwhelmed, if you're ever not sure if you're working on the right things or if things are actually lean and getting to your 80-20, Chuck will help you get there. And look at everything that you're doing, all of the different activities that you're doing, and ask yourself, are you getting a return on that investment from either a time, a money, or an energy perspective? Is it fulfilling? Is it still aligned with where you want to take things going forward? Is it something that's an investment in your future? Maybe it's not something you expect to see an immediate result from, like relationship building or something like that, but it's important for where you want to go next. And really honestly assess, is it something that you should cut entirely? It's really not taking you closer to that vision. It's not taking you closer to your goals. It's something that maybe you've been doing out of shoulding or guilt or because you always did, but you can let it go. Maybe it's important long-term, but it's not important right now. And you could put it on hold to create the space for other things that are. Is it something that is important, but it's not giving you the results you want in the way that you want? So you want to change it up a little bit. You want to experiment, try some different things and see if you can get better results, or you want to keep it. It's working great. It's doing its thing. You want to double down and just keep getting those results, right? But I think if you can pause every 30 days and run the things you're doing through that activity, it's so incredibly simple. Cut, hold, change, or keep. It will support you to make sure that you're focused on the 20% instead of wasting your time in the 80% that's not getting you where you want to go.
Amazing. I love it. I'm going to write it on my whiteboard right there. And I love the 30-day challenge on that, to just put that right into the project management tool and do a quick review on it's like an all project review, right? It's like an all things. Yeah. Awesome. So everyone, this has been Krista Grasso with leanoutmethod.com. I'm just thinking of all the women that we were in touch with 10 years ago through Allie Brown's training. I hope some of them are listening in. I'm guessing Rachel Resnick will be. So fun to be with you over the years, Krista, and just see how your work has continued just to help so many people lean out and hit their goals.
Same. Thank you so much for having me on today.